Goods exported from Canada and Mexico to the US will be hit with a 25% tariff. Products from China with 10%.
American President Donald Trump put a 25% tariff on Canada on hold for a month, but this caused a great deal of stress among the United States and Canada. Of course, there were additional parties that desired to take advantage of this tension. One of these parties was China, which the US targeted with a 10% tariff slice. China has increased its intents to import Canadian natural resources, and oil are found virtually everywhere. Day after the conclusion of the extension of the Trans Mountain in Canada pipeline, with an oil tanker load in May, the line's sands have gone. Beneath the Lion Gate Bridge in Vancouver will soon be completed to refineries in the Pacific. These tankers, marked for China and Japan, a significant change for Canada that had been exporting massive oil flows for a long time to the United States only. The $34 billion Trans Mountain expansion success fueled Canada's ambitions to further distance itself from its unpredictable neighbor and play a larger role in global oil markets, even as President Donald Trump's tariff threats highlighted the dangers of this reliance. By exporting Canada's oil resources, China was fiercely vying with Japan for all of Canada's oil reserves. The Beijing regime intended to bolster the divide between Washington and Ottawa and increase its own reserves. But Canada surprised Japan by taking action against China over the shipping of energy resources like LNG and oil. Now we examine the reasons in more detail. In its tax policy, Canada favored Japan over China. In disagreement with the United States, we shall additionally talk about the consequences for the global economy. But first, kindly, please remember to subscribe to our channel, turn on alerts, and like our content. Returning to the subject at hand, oil and natural gas in Alberta, Canada. The producing province is trying to find alternative energy export routes because the United States threats of tariffs management and seeks to bring Canada's LNG to Japan. You heard it right. Prior to the implementation of US tariffs, Canada is turning to Japan rather than China, the province of Alberta surroundings and protected zones. At one of these meetings, Minister Rebecca Schultz has been discussing Canadian energy exports to Japan with trade and industry associations in Tokyo. Schultz underlined how crucial Canadian LNG is to Japan's energy security. As Japan shifts away from coal, Schultz also underlined that Canada's dependable LNG will lower emissions and improve economic relations between the two nations. Taking these claims into account, it is evident that Canada will complete its first LNG export project to Japan this year. According to Canadian officials, all of this is because of the tax policies of US President Donald Trump, who has compelled them to increase the volume of their exports for fearing different tariffs in the future. Schultz pointed out that Alberta has a geographical advantage over the US, with the US Gulf Coast being much longer than the Alberta-Japan route for LNG and other energy exports. Additionally, according to Schultz, the province currently poses less geopolitical risk than the United States. He adds that in order to increase its export capacity, Alberta is working on 4 or 5 projects. Japan is happy that Canada selected it instead of China. At meetings held in Tokyo this week, Yuya Hasegawa, director of the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry's Energy Resources Development Division, stated that they are eager to receive LNG resources being shipped from Canada. Since the Beijing regime depends on oil and gas supplies, the Chinese side lost this crucial chance. So the Xi regime is greatly shocked that Canada's new clientele now includes Japan rather than China. Will likely be even more impressed by the fact that Canada and Japan reached agreements on LNG the day after China made contact. In addition, economic and diplomatic experts predict that Canada will export liquefied natural gas to Japan at 0% tariff, and that we will identify and remove them. We also have illegal immigrants and others as Alberta tries to increase its attractiveness in Japan. This weekend, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru and US President Trump may meet to discuss potential Japanese backing for a proposed $44 billion LNG export project in Alaska. However, If the Ottawa government agrees with Tokyo on LG and other energy resources, it might be too late for that, as Canada appears to have already made up its mind. What losses does the United States stand to lose in these areas? The Deep North's south integration of the North American energy infrastructure means that diversification efforts away from Canada will be expensive and time-consuming, even though Canadian exports of electricity and gas boost U.S. energy reserves, lower consumer costs, and support U.S. objectives of increasing international energy exports to allies. As a net exporter of natural gas and oil, the U.S. seeks to meet rising domestic demand, while assisting Europe and allied Asia in reducing their reliance on less sustainable energy sources. The abundance of American reserves is being strained by energy-intensive data centers that use artificial intelligence and other technologies. With integrated pipelines and grids, Canada's steady energy production could help the U.S. supply. This would allow the U.S. to export natural gas and oil to its international allies without raising domestic consumers' gas prices. One of Trump's main objectives, if tensions between the United States and Canada hadn't recently flared up, this was most likely the plan for the two nations' energy relationship. Over the past few decades, Canada's proportion of U.S. crude oil imports has increased dramatically, now accounting for 24% of U.S. oil consumption. Cross-border pipelines deliver heavy crude oil straight to U.S. refineries that are specifically built to process it for these refineries. Relying on alternative sources like Venezuela or the Middle East, or facing high re-regulation costs, could result from people in the Midwest, in particular, abandoning Canadian heavy crude due to geopolitical risks. More recently, the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion has nearly tripled Canada's ability to export oil to tidal markets, enabling its oil to support its allies around the world, including Japan and South Korea. The recent crisis has strengthened Canada's ties with these nations. While the United States produces the majority of its own electricity, Canadian sources keep the lights on and costs low in several U.S. states. Examples of new projects include hydroelectric. The goal of Quebec's Hurl-New York power line is to supply 20% of the electricity required in New York City, thus increasing. Over the next 3 decades, residents are expected to save $17 billion in electricity costs, thanks to electricity exports. Over 30 cross-border transmission lines link American states and Canadian provinces. The rapid development of artificial intelligence technology, a strategic priority for the United States, is anticipated to result in a sharp increase in electricity consumption from U.S. data centers, which are predicted to account for up to 12% of total U.S. consumption by 2028, compared to 4.4% in 2023. However, a tariff dispute in the near future could upend all of these U.S. plans. Canada is crucial for ensuring cross-border grid security and as a potential source of incremental generation. However, Canada asserts that its impact will be less severe than that of the United States. According to the Canadian government, the country urgently needs to realign its economic interests with the United States in order to establish new ties in Asia in the near future. Although the United States can manage independently, the path to self-sufficiency will be more difficult, expensive, and time-consuming. Both parties must collaborate in 3 crucial areas of mutual benefit due to the shifting geopolitical and economic landscape. This approach mainly relies on the United States. Boarding. There is believed to be limited time to persuade Washington of the necessity of collaboration in the area of resources and energy, which has been turned into a weapon by a number of enemies. The NDP made new election pledges yesterday to impose tariffs on Tesla electric vehicles, restore the federal EV rebate, and double the rebate if consumers buy a Canadian-made plug-in vehicle. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh on a campaign-style tour of Windsor, Ontario, Canada's automotive capital. Canada also needs to get its internal affairs in order. Singh informed reporters that tariffs on all Canadian goods would be applied if Trump fulfills his threat. A resource-driven economic and trade strategy will necessitate billions of dollars in new infrastructure, including ports, railroads, and domestic and international processing facilities. The new Democratic federal government will impose a 100% trade tax on all Tesla products. These are not new issues for Canada. In summary, tariff tensions have caused serious issues for both nations, and actors like China are a pending risk factor in Asia that is attempting to capitalize on this issue. Only when there is a stable regulatory environment and reliable pricing in markets that can be extremely volatile will capital come to the table. Only then will it be clear how Canada and Japan's energy deal will affect the dynamics between Washington and Tokyo. Thank you for watching. Canada-China trade relations have become increasingly tense due to recent disputes over tariffs and trade policies. Canada imposed high tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, EVs, which China claims violate World Trade Organization, WTO, rules. In response, China launched an investigation into whether Canada's actions breach international trade agreements. The dispute highlights broader issues with the WTO's ability to enforce fair trade rules, as global trade governance faces challenges from political influences and economic protectionism. If the situation escalates, it could impact supply chains and the competitiveness of businesses in both countries.